Nikola Jovic has been stellar with the Serbian national team as he made a case to become a starter for the Miami Heat. We'll debate that in today's episode of Locked On Heat.
You are Locked On Heat, your daily Miami Heat podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All right, welcome to Locked On Heat, your daily podcast on the Miami Heat, whether you're tuning in on YouTube or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. I'm Wes Goldberg here with David Ramil. Both of us are credentialed Heat media members who cover this team every day for daily content on the Heat. Join more than 17,000 everydayers and click that subscribe button on YouTube. Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. Take control of your finances with Monarch Money. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com for 50% off your first year. Have a great show for you today. We are continuing our 25 of 25 series with one of the most unexpected Heat fan favorites of all time. We're going to talk about that in a second. But David, Nikola Jovic, dude, is looking good at EuroBasket. Serbia routing Estonia in their first game on Wednesday afternoon during the EuroBasket tournament. Nico had 12 points in the first quarter. He finished with 18 points. Shot 6 of 8 overall, 3 of 4 on three-pointers. He had 4 rebounds, 6 assists. He had a steal. And, David, he did it all in just 16 minutes. He didn't even have to play in the fourth quarter because this thing was a blowout. And, look, I think people need to watch these highlights because I just love the way that Serbia is using Nico in these games. He's being he's all over the floor, man. Like, He's not necessarily running plays. Serbia's not really running plays for him. It's not point Nico. That's not what's really happening here. He did have the 6 assists in this game, but it's all happening within the flow of the offense. And they play up-tempo. Obviously, having Nikola Jovic there is very helpful because he attracts so much attention, and he's such a great floor general, and he's getting everybody involved. But, it's not just Nico shooting from the corners, right? Even though he is doing that. He's the trailer in transition. He's running the break and finding guys on lobs and for cuts. He's empowered to play all over the court, and I think that enables him to lean more into his versatility and all the things that we love so much about Nikola Jovic. And while it's so exciting to watch him play this way for Serbia, at the same time, you can't help but wonder what this would look like if he were sort of let off the leash a little bit in Miami and allowed to explore kind of the entire studio space of his game.
Is he not being allowed? I mean, do you really think that's the case? Because I don't know if I've ever considered it from that perspective. And watching him play today, I don't know if it's my biggest takeaway, but certainly I think it's a factor to consider. One, you're facing a far inferior opponent in Estonia. No knock on them necessarily, but Serbia, clearly a much better basketball team. And you're also playing with the best basketball player on the planet. And that being the case, as you said, not only is he a player that commands a lot of attention from defenders, but because of his incredible passing skills, he's going to find you in places that maximize what you could do out on the floor. So is it that Nico in Miami can't thrive because he's not being allowed to play his game, or it's because he's being asked to do more than perhaps he's capable of with players that don't put him in a position to succeed? And I wonder whether or not there's the opportunity for that role, maybe for Bam Adebayo to become kind of the hub on offense the way he has been in the past.
Maybe allowed wasn't the right word. It's not. I don't think Eric Spoelstra is holding him back from being a better basketball player. Like, I don't think he's like, you know what, we know you could do all these things, but we'd rather you just not.
He's being asked to do something specific, though, or maybe he's not being allowed to, not being showcased in a way where he's kind of free to.
I think that's fair. I don't think that he's enabled to do it. And again, I don't know. It's just he's playing with Jokic. They were playing a lousy Estonia team. Serbia was favored by 31 points in this game. They were supposed to blow. This is what it was supposed to look like. Like, Nikola Jovic would be the best. Nikola Jovic would be the best player on Estonia. Okay, so it's not shocking that necessarily that this was a blowout. Although I don't want to take anything away from Nico in this game because, again, the way that he's being used, and also in some of the preparation games that sort of like this isn't new for the way that Serbia is or that Jovic has been used for Serbia now, or even in the past when he's played for them. His best stretches of basketball have arguably been with Serbia on the national stage and national tournaments, right? FIBA, Olympics, EuroBasket, whatever. So
we talked about this last year during the Olympics.
We did. It feels like every year we're talking about this.
Yeah, I just don't want it to be like the same cycle where it's like we get hyped up over what we see from Nico on the Serbian team, and then you expect him to become that kind of a player, and he gets the opportunity the way he did last year to start, and he's no longer able to function in the same way, and he's disappointing, and then he has to kind of remind himself or remember how it is he's supposed to play within the context of the Miami Heat, and that kind of is a struggle for him until he finally figures it out. And yes, there's always the threat of injury too that has seemed to damper his ability to produce the way that we expect him to. Like we see, I mean, those kind of numbers that you were mentioning before, those are phenomenal numbers. Yeah, I can't support an opponent, fine, but it's still a solid overall game for a player who didn't even wind up playing for a majority.
And
of
we've
it.
seen Nico have spurts like that in NBA games. Like we've seen
That's
this
true.
happen from him. And
Right.
to me, it comes down to the pace. And we had a conversation the other day about what we want to see from Miami's offense and some of the changes. And the number one thing I think about is pace. Jimmy Butler's not here anymore. There's no reason to slow it down, to throw it to Jimmy in the post, let him sort of poke and prod at the defense, bully his way into the paint, and then start creating things from there. They don't have that guy. That guy's not on this roster. And I think it behooves the entire team to play a lot faster because that's what this personnel is. Not just for Nico, but for Bam, for Tyler, for Norm Powell, for Andrew Wiggins. All of these guys would thrive in a faster, up-tempo type of style. So when I watch Serbia, I see two things. I see up-tempo offense that's a ton of just outlet passes from Jokic and all these things. I see up-tempo offense, and I see equal opportunity offense. Just because Jokic is the best player on the planet, he's dominating the game because he is just so great, but it doesn't feel like it's throw the ball to James Harden and get out of the way heliocentric offense. It does still feel like it's a flow, which is, again, what makes Jokic just such an amazing basketball player, is he's able to dominate without all that heliocentric stuff. But if Miami could capture that, even just a little bit of that essence, and unleash it on their offense, I think, again, Nico would thrive and have his best season of his career, and I think a lot of the players on the roster would thrive.
What's the lineup that would allow Nico to play with that kind of up-tempo style? Because I think I teased it at the beginning of the show, and we've discussed it before. The idea of him as a starter is a tantalizing one, but I just think that you're too heavily invested right now. And a training camp will ultimately determine this. If Nico just simply outplays Khalil Ware, it's a moot issue. But I think Ware's likely to be the starter, if for no other reason than because it allows Bam to minimize the wear and tear on his body, and I think that's crucial for Miami moving forward. So it's likely that Ware is going to continue starting, although I think Nico has a case, and maybe he makes it a strong one during training camp. But assuming he comes off the bench, what's the lineup? Because I'm thinking to myself, it's probably Jaime Jaquez, another guy who can play with pace.
Mm-hmm.
And there's kind of where maybe Pelle Larsson, is he a guy who can play with pace as well? I know we'll talk about him in a second. And who else? If you're staggering minutes, you don't want to go with an all reserves lineup necessarily, but who from the starting lineup? Is it Tyler at the 2 with Davion?
To me, it's one of I like the idea of Powell being there because he could play up tempo. Tyler is a little bit more prodding in when he kind of gets to his worst sort of devices. He could end up kind of dribbling the air out of the ball. Norm Powell is really, especially in transition, he's kind of go. So and Davion Mitchell is the guy I want.
Obviously.
That to me, lineups, whatever, they'll figure it out. I want Davion playing with Nico as much as possible because both of those guys just get downhill in a hurry. And even just as a pick and roll tandem, it makes a ton of sense. I don't want Nico playing the 5, but as a pick and roll tandem, it does make a ton of sense. Or pick and pop, whatever you want to call it, as a 2-man game, those guys make a lot of sense. And then put Bam out there for defense. I don't have a problem with that.
Yes.
To me, again, Nico should be their version of Naz Reid. He comes in when one of the 2 centers comes out, right? They're going to start Bam and Ware more likely than not. Let's say Ware comes out. He's the first center that goes to the bench. Nico comes in. You're automatically toggling into a little bit more of a smaller type of lineup. You're starting with 2 centers. You take one off the floor. Now you just have the 1 center. You still have him for defense because I think Nico is not a rim protector, so you need some rim protection out there. And then you're just playing. I think Bam can play up tempo. I think all of these guys can.
So Bam stays at the center spot. Nico in for Ware, basically. Davion in for Hero, and then either Larson or Hawkins maybe in for Andrew Wiggins for that added pace.
And Wiggins could play out there too, right? Like he can also run pick and roll and with Jokic or Jovic. I think all those guys could do it. You mentioned Pelle Larsson. Not as hot a start to EuroBasket for him. He has 10 points on 3 of 8 shooting, 0 for 4 on 3-point range, and also fouled out in Sweden's loss to Finland. So, with Pella, there's so many things that he does really well. There's 2 things that are really limiting him. It's the fact that 3-point shot is not reliable, and the fact that he still just fouls way too much. And both of those things on display in his game for Sweden to open up EuroBasket. So quick last word on this, David, and then we'll get out of here.
No, it's just unfortunate because I think a lot of people had high expectations for him. Solid summer league outing for him. And yeah, he clearly is a high IQ player and understands how to play the game. But with that constant effort, and we've talked about this ever since he was drafted, as much as he becomes a fan favorite because he gives that hustle also burns him on more than one occasion. And it leads to the kind of foul trouble. And without him being the consistent offensive player that Miami needs him to be, I think we're still going to see his minutes up and down just because he's up and down as a player.
25 of 25 is next. We are getting into the top 20 now. And this player that we're about to talk about really kind of not the start of Heat culture, but maybe embodied a certain kind of player within Heat culture, whatever that is. We'll talk about it next.
Today's episode is brought to you by Monarch Money. At least it was. Most people can't name all their financial accounts or even what they're worth, whether it's 401ks, properties, or investments. And when you don't have the full picture, you can end up leaving money on the table. And that's why there's Monarch Money. It's an all-in-one personal finance tool that brings your entire financial life together in one clean, easy-to-use interface on your laptop or your phone. Monarch is built for people with busy lives. If you're put off organizing your finances, Monarch is for you. Monarch does the heavy lifting for you. You can link all of your accounts in minutes, see clear data visuals, get smart categorization of your spending, and finally feel in control of your money without ever touching a spreadsheet. If you can identify that you aren't saving as much money as you thought, well, Monarch helps you notice an inefficient investment allocation and maybe discover forgotten 401ks from past jobs. Sometimes it does happen. Those things can slip under the radar. And if you're looking to save up for a big-time purchase, well, Monarch Money helps you stay on track with your financial goals. So that's, and so many reasons more, why Monarch Money is a tool for you. Don't let financial opportunity slip through the cracks. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA at monarchmoney.com in your browser for half off your first year. That's 50% off your first year. 50% at monarchmoney.com with the code LOCKEDONNBA. We'll be right back.
Thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen every day. We have an important request. Locked On wants to hear from you. We've put together a survey to learn more about our listeners and make your favorite podcast even better. This is a chance to tell us what you like, what you don't like, and answer questions about our advertising. Go to lockedonpodcast.com/survey to get started. Everyone who completes a survey will be entered for a chance to win one of 10 $100 Amazon gift cards. No reason not to do it. Again, that's lockedonpodcast.com/survey. You can also find the link in the show notes. Thanks for helping us out. This is our 25 of 25 series, looking back at the top 25 Heat players of the last 25 seasons. Each episode, we'll be taking an in-depth look at every player who made the list, as voted on by us and our Locked On Heat Insider community, through the lens of what made them a definitive part of the franchise's history. On the last episode, Caleb Martin checked in at number 20. Today, we enter the top 20 with one of the Heat's most unexpected fan favorites. At number 19, it is Brian Grant. Grant joined the Heat in the summer of 2000 as part of the team's aggressive push to rebuild around Alonzo Mourning and Pat Riley's vision of a championship contender, the Heat acquired him through a complex sign-and-trade deal with the Trailblazers and Cavaliers, giving Miami a rugged power forward known for his relentless energy, defense, and rebounding. At the time, the move was seen as a bold statement that Miami was committed to surrounding Alonzo Mourning with talent to chase another run deep into the playoffs. But Alonzo Mourning's kidney disease thrust Grant into the starting center spot. Grant quickly became a fan favorite in Miami. Standing at just 6'9" with an undersized but muscular frame, he often had to battle against taller centers, with Mourning's kidney ailment limiting his availability in that first season. Despite giving up to the size, Grant's toughness and hustle stood out as did his willingness to do the dirty work, defending the paint, taking charges and fighting for rebounds. In his first season, he helped Miami reach the playoffs, and although the team's postseason success was limited during his tenure, his leadership and his work ethic were never in question. One of Grant's most memorable seasons came in that 2001 season when Mourning missed significant time and Grant shifted to center, averaging a double-double for stretches and anchoring Miami's front court. He also provided valuable veteran presence during the transitional years as the franchise retooled after Mourning's health struggles and before the arrival of Shaquille O'Neal and Dwayne Wade's rise to stardom. Beyond the court, Grant's personality and resilience resonated with fans and teammates. Known for his trademark dreadlocks and blue-collar playing style, he embodied the gritty culture Pat Riley wanted in Miami. While he never put up huge scoring numbers, his value came in the intangibles: effort, toughness, and in leadership. Grant's tenure in Miami came to an end in the summer of 2004 when he was part of the blockbuster trade package that brought Shaquille O'Neal from the Lakers to the shores of South Beach. Though his departure was bittersweet, it underscored his importance as a key asset in one of the biggest trades in franchise history. In retrospect, Brian Grant's 4 seasons with Miami may not have produced championships, but they did cement his reputation as a selfless, hardworking player whose impact went far beyond the stat sheet. David, I wasn't joking when I said Brian Grant was an unexpected fan favorite. What stands out to you when you think about his tenure in Miami?
I think what I always remember is two things. One, you kind of hinted at him being undersized, and people kind of, I think, have forgotten that when his acquisition took place, he was supposed to be brought in as a PJ Brown replacement. He was going to start at power forward alongside Alonzo Mourning in that retooled offense around Eddie Jones, et cetera, with Tim Hardaway still kind of leading the point. And it just didn't work out that way because of Alonzo's kidney disease, and he wound up missing that significant amount of time that first year. And Brian was kind of forced into a very undersized starting center. Like, he is vastly undersized for the center position, especially at that point in time. Imagine
At that
you
point,
have to
yes.
guard Shaquille O'Neal, David Robinson, Patrick Ewing still towards the end of his career. But still, like, the bigger centers were very much a factor at that point in time.
Yeah, I mean, you think about 6'9" now, that doesn't sound very undersized, right? Bam Adebayo is 6'9", and maybe we consider him slightly undersized, but the way we looked at Brian Grant having been forced to play center at that stage, it was like you're playing a kindergartner at center. Like, it was just so different back then.
I know it's become a little apocryphal, and I've brought it up before when we talk about Brian, but maybe this is part of why I know how much he means to you and people who grew up watching that era of basketball, because he was kind of symbolic, again, as you said, about Heat culture. But there's a story, I believe it was Steve Francis, a Houston Rocket, who told a story of Brian Grant guarding a very good Houston Rockets team with Yao Ming, and Yao taking his jersey off in the Rockets locker room and, quote unquote, seeing his back scratched up by a tiger. And that was what Brian Grant had done to Yao Ming, because he was just willing to do everything possible. As undersized he was, imagine Yao Ming, almost a foot taller than Brian, and still Grant tried to hold his own with every ounce of muscle he had, every ounce of toughness that he was available to him. He just did his best to try and guard a far superior and far larger player in Ming. And that was just kind of the way Grant played during his Heat tenure. He always tried his best. He never had to worry. He was a consummate professional, always willing to do whatever was asked of him, never grumbled, never asked for more playing time. And even when things changed over that 4 years, because, well, they just had to, like, Lamar Odom was eventually brought in 2003. The team went through all these different things, different iterations. There was, trying to incorporate Zoe back in that first year, and then, obviously he misses a significant amount of time. It was a bleak time period in between 2001 and the signing of Dwayne Wade in 2003. And Brian tried his best, but that team just wasn't good enough to actually achieve any postseason success.
And then he's a big part of that team. He ends up just becoming that guy. He ends up starting at center for that Dwayne Wade team, Dwayne Wade's rookie year, and they go to the playoffs and they win that series. And he was a big part of that too. His highest ranking within our little network here was 15. The lowest was not ranked. I had him at 22. David, you're responsible for his highest ranking at 15. You get to defend your case at why you have Brian Grant as one of the 15 most important players of the last 25 years here in a second. We'll get to that, trivia, and our categories after this. So why 15? Why so high?
Yeah, because again, he was a 4-year starter. Like, I mean, they did make the playoffs 2 years during that time. And I know we all have a soft spot for our role players, and I'm sure there'll be a lot of others. But a 4-year starter to me is a far better and far more worthy candidate than any of the role players that I know we're going to talk about over the next 5 to 10 names here, because those are just the kind of, like, those guys stand out, and they might have been there during far more successful eras in Heat basketball. But Brian weathered the storm. He kind of helped tie those eras together. I've made the point before, but for so many years prior to Dwayne's departure in 2019, up to that point, and we've been doing the podcast for such a long time that I always remember, this franchise that always had either Dwayne Wade or Alonzo Mourning on the roster. Brian, one of the few players that played with both. Like, he was able to tie those eras together in such a way. And yeah, there was bleak times in between there, but that wasn't a reflection of who he was as a player. And just because he wasn't so great, I mean, again, PJ Brown doesn't make the cut because he wasn't one of those. He wasn't a player on this roster over the last 25 years. But I still would have certainly put PJ in there had he been a player over the last 25 years. Because again, he was just one of those really solid starters who contributed at a high level. And I think for Brian, he did everything he was asked for him, like I said, and I think he did his job really, really well and consistently over 4 years, and played as a starter in an era when he should not have been starting at center. So I think all that kind of ties into my view of what Grant was as a player.
Yep.
And how I think he always was able to play professionally and well and just do his job. I mean,
you nailed it when you said tied the two eras together. That is such an important part of it. He is such a bridge from that late 90s Alonzo Mourning, Tim Hardaway team, and I know he wasn't technically part of the late 90s teams, but like those teams, and then it's the Brian Grant years to start the 2000s, all that weird stuff that we were talking about, and then he's a big part of that team, and then he's arguably even bigger part for a team that ends up making the playoffs after drafting Dwayne Wade. So, and then he becomes sort of an ultimate bridge piece because he becomes part of the Shaquille O'Neal trade. But that kind of gets us into trivia. So let's jump in to our trivia segment here. Brian Grant was included in the 2004 trade package that brought Shaq to Miami. Name one of the other Heat players who were also sent to the Lakers in that trade.
Well, we talked about Caron Butler already, but you could also include somebody else. I know Lamar Odom was also sent in that trade.
Easy peasy. You get that one. In the 2001, next question. In the 2001 NBA playoffs, the Heat were swept in the first round by which team during Brian Grant's first postseason in Miami?
Oh, I want to say the Charlotte Hornets and Jamal Murray.
It was the Charlotte Hornets. And back then, it was a 5-game series. So it was 3-0. They were swept 3-0.
3-5, 3-5. Yeah, vengeance shall be mine, Mashburn, after being traded for Eddie Jones.
Okay, so I gave you two easy ones, David, to start us off. This one I think is a little bit tougher. I don't think you're going to get it, but maybe you'll surprise me. In November 2005, after talking with neurologists at OHSU, Grant was diagnosed with early onset Parkinson's disease after discussions and encouragement by well-known Parkinson's sufferers like Michael J. Fox and Muhammad Ali. Brian Grant publicized his diagnosis in 2009. His memoir, Rebound, Soaring in the NBA, Battling Parkinson's, and Finding What Really Matters, was released in 2021. Who was the co-author of his book?
Wow. Wow, that was not an easy one. Man. Is it Michael J. Fox?
No, it was not. Good guess, though.
Yeah, I know. I don't know.
It's I'll give you one more guess.
A reporter right from Portland, maybe? What's his name? Jason Quinn? Is it
Jason Quick?
Jason Quick from Portland, right?
No. I mean that is a person and a Trailblazers reporter, but he's not the answer to our question here. The answer is Rick Bucher.
Yeah. Okay.
Interesting enough.
Strange
but you go strangely enough, that's certainly a choice. Let's jump into our recurring segments. We've got our sliding doors moment. Is he jersey worthy? And then we'll decide whether or not he passes the Eddie Jones test before we get to our 25-25 verses. Let's start with our sliding doors moment. This is a what if moment that could have changed the way that this player is remembered for better or for worse, or could have changed the trajectory of his career in Miami. And to me, this one is really easy, David. Maybe you came up with something different, but to me, the thing that stands out, and it has to be the answer. What if Zoe doesn't have the kidney stuff? what happens? Because Brian Grant is. We talked so much about Alonzo Mourning in our Brian Grant episode because he is such an important piece in the Brian Grant story. What if this crazy rare kidney disease never afflicts Alonzo Mourning in the first place? Right. Weirdly enough, Brian Grant, you hate to say it this way, but almost like his legacy was benefited by the kidney stuff with Alonzo Mourning because he was forced to do this and he became the fan favorite in that way. I wonder if if Pat Riley just trades for him in the summer of 2000, he just comes in and plays power forward. I think that's an interesting what if moment because you could argue he wouldn't be remembered the same because he wasn't sort of thrust into that position and isn't remembered in that kind of gritty Heat culture way. At the same side, he could have just been playing his natural position for a few years there, and maybe he would have been even better than what he ultimately was as an undersized 5.
Or it would have been a part of, and for people like you who view this with greater importance than I do, he would have been part of far more successful teams. And so he would have just been playing his role as a role player and not as a starting center, but he would have contributed to teams that, in my opinion, were set up and built to win a championship. I mean, Alonzo was an MVP-type player, or at least certainly one of the best players in the league before the kidney disease kind of took him out. Like, he had just represented the United States in the Sydney Olympics, et cetera. And so, like, he was still a defensive player of the year.
He was coming off his second DPOY, right?
Yeah. He was still in his peak. And you had Eddie Jones. So it's like they just took the roster that they had that had all that success in the playoffs, or maybe, you know, they were challenged by the Knicks or whatever, but they were still built to win. And they had Alonzo, Brian Grant, Eddie Jones, Tim Hardaway, and he had Anthony Mason coming off the bench. He was a super sub. That super sub wound up starting because of Alonzo's missing time and became an all-star. The one time he was an all-star, it was 1 year in Miami. So, I mean, that was a far better team maybe than even the team that so many Heat fans hold in such high regard.
It would be like had the Heat signing PJ Tucker in 2022 and then Bam having to play just 13 games that season. Like it just Bam just vanishing from the planet and just like, all right, PJ Tucker, you're playing the 5 now. But that team that team would not have made the Eastern Conference Finals.
No, that's frightening. That is absolutely terrifying. Yeah.
But that's exactly that's kind of what it was, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
That's kind of what it was. All right, next one here. Is he jersey worthy? Is this a cool jersey to own and wear to a Miami Heat game? David, this is 100%, without question, absolutely a yes. This is a cool jersey to have.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, no other way of putting it. Like he was just such a unique player. Had his look with the dreadlocks. You know, It was just he was a big part of it. And I remember watching him. You know, he wasn't part of any kind of really good Portland team, and he was with the Sacramento Kings before that, so he was just kind of a player that had been buried in the league, and you really didn't know him too well. And yet then he comes to Miami, and he's thrust into this incredible role. Absolutely jersey worthy. Absolutely, 100%.
He would get those rebounds, and his dreadlocks would just sort of flip up in the air, and he would grab it with 2 hands, and he would just kind
elbows out.
Yep.
Yeah, elbows out. I remember, I always loved those. Yeah.
Sweat, just sort of sweat beads coming off the dreadlocks. This is one of those jerseys where if you see it, you're like, that's a real Heat fan. The Eddie Jones test. If re-added to the current roster in his Heat prime, would this player make this current team better? Yes, of course. The Heat don't have a backup center. He would just be that. He done.
Finally able to play the role he was supposed to. You know, you could put him at the 4 or the 5. Like, he would have been such a great compliment alongside Bam or Khalil. Good mid-range game,
right?
Good back to the basket game at that point in time, and he was just thrust into a position where he just was going up against such big men at the time, and it was just such, that he flourished under those circumstances is nothing short of remarkable. Because I don't even really think he was 6'9". I think he's more like that 6'8".
I agree.
To be honest with you, so and it's just that he tried his best is such a great thing. But yeah, if he could come here into this era now and contribute to this Heat team, absolutely he'd contribute.
Finally, our final category here, versus. We're going to pin this player against the player who came before him and ask, did we get it right? Technically on my list, no. I have Caleb at 20. I had Brian Grant at 22. I don't want to put down Brian Grant. He's one of my all-time favorite players. I don't care that he's one spot ahead of Caleb Martin. To me, I love that these guys are next to each other, David, in our rankings, because they're so similar in that they were forced to play roles outside of what they probably should have been playing and were signed to do. They said, hey, we kind of got hired for one job, and then you're like 1 week into your new position, and they're like, actually we actually need you in the C-suite now. buddy. Like there's a lot for you to learn. Like your time in the mail room is up. You've just been promoted to a much higher usage role there. So I love that these guys are next to each other because their stories are very similar.
Yeah, I agree 100%. But the difference I think, though, Bryant was brought in to be a starter and wound up holding that role, whereas Caleb kind of worked his way up there. So Bryant was more productive, especially for that era of basketball where players were just, their numbers were a little bit diminished. In today's game, I imagine he'd probably be a floor spacing big, like a guy who could probably stretch the floor a little bit just because he did have that nice jumper. So he probably would have been encouraged, as so many players are, to go beyond the 3-point mark. And,
Maybe a little like Gershon Yabusele-y.
yeah, I could see that.
Like
Maybe
a little bit
Yabusele
like
is a
with
little
better
bit more
range.
stout. Yeah. I could see that. It's a good comparison. But yeah, absolutely. I think we got it right. I think he probably should have been higher. And I think anybody who didn't vote him higher, and I'm not knocking you necessarily, it's just I think you kind of tend to forget what he was brought in to do, and that era of basketball, as you've said before, wasn't very successful, and it's not one that's highly remembered by a lot of fans.
He has to be on the top 25. To me, 15, 22, 20, wherever you have him, he's got to be in your top 25. There is no history of the last 25 Heat seasons without Brian Grant. But let us know what you think in the YouTube comments. For now, thanks for making Locked On Heat your first listen today. For your second listen, find the Locked On NBA podcast where there is no offseason, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.